My name is Nia. I am 34 years old. I inherited $50 million and was about to tell my husband of 7 years that our financial struggles were finally over. That was until the notary looked at his screen and informed me that according to state records, I had been legally divorced for exactly 32 days. I stood there speechless for 10 seconds. Then I realized my entire marriage had been a carefully orchestrated scam. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had the trash take itself out only to find gold underneath the bin. The mahogany-paneled office of Attorney Sterling smelled of aged leather and expensive cologne. I sat staring at the thick stack of legal documents resting on the polished desk in front of me. Attorney Sterling had just spent 2 agonizing hours walking me through my new reality. My biological father, an Atlanta real estate mogul, had passed away. He was a ghost in my life, a man who never showed up for my birthdays or my college graduations. Yet for some inexplicable reason, he had chosen to leave his entire commercial property empire to me. The total valuation of the assets was a staggering $50 million. My hands trembled as I held the heavy gold fountain pen. $50 million. I thought about the endless, grueling double shifts I pulled at my corporate event planning agency. I thought about the aching, swollen feet I endured after standing for 14 hours straight managing gala logistics, just to ensure our residential mortgage was paid on time. I thought of all the immense sacrifices I had made to support my husband Terrence. Terrence was the chief executive officer of a logistics startup. He loved the prestigious title but absolutely hated the actual grueling work required to build a company. For 7 long years, I was the sole financial engine behind his ambition. I paid the mortgage on our suburban house, I covered his luxury car note, and I footed the bill for his server fees so his business website stayed active. I poured every ounce of my energy into being a supportive, loving wife, truly believing we were building an unbreakable empire together. Sitting in that plush, climate-controlled office, I felt a massive wave of pure relief wash over me. The suffocating struggle was finally over. We were safe and wealthy beyond our wildest imagination. I reached into my designer purse to grab my phone, desperately wanting to call Terrence immediately. I wanted to hear him shout with joy and tell him his startup worries were finished forever, so we could finally take that romantic vacation to the Maldives he kept talking about. Attorney Sterling smiled warmly and gestured to the notary sitting across from us, who smoothly slid the final tax declaration form toward me. "Please sign right here on the dotted line, Ms. Williams," the notary said, tapping the paper. "We just need your spouse to come into the office later this week to sign the acknowledgement waiver due to Georgia marital property guidelines. I will verify his full legal name in the state registry right now to prepare the addendum for you. Terrence Jamal Davis," I said proudly, adjusting my posture in the leather chair. "We have been married for 7 beautiful years." The notary nodded and typed the name into his secure database. Suddenly, the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard stopped completely. He frowned, leaning much closer to his bright monitor and clicking his mouse again with a puzzled look. He looked at Attorney Sterling, then slowly shifted his gaze to me with an incredibly uncomfortable expression on his face. "Ms. Williams," the notary whispered hesitantly, his voice laced with confusion. "I cannot list Terrence Jamal Davis as your spouse on this official document." I chuckled softly, assuming it was just a simple clerical error. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Did I spell something wrong?" The notary swallowed hard, adjusting his glasses. "No, Mom. According to the state registry, you do not have a spouse. A default judgment of divorce between you and Mr. Davis was finalized by the county judge exactly 32 days ago. You are legally a single woman." I froze completely. The bright smile melted off my face, instantly replaced by sheer horror. I stared at the notary, unable to comprehend the words coming out of his mouth. 10 seconds of suffocating, deafening silence ticked by. The antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room sounded like a heavy hammer striking an anvil against my skull. "Divorced." I repeated the word, feeling completely breathless and disoriented. "That is impossible. I live with him. We share a bed every single night. I made him breakfast this very morning. There must be a massive mistake in your system." Attorney Sterling shifted into high alert, recognizing the severity of the situation. He quickly turned his large monitor around and accessed the county court portal, typing our names into the system. A digital file immediately popped up on the screen. Sterling clicked it and let out a sharp, shocked breath. Nia, I am so incredibly sorry, Sterling said with genuine shock and pity in his voice. The notary is absolutely correct. A divorce petition was filed against you 6 months ago by Terrence Jamal Davis. Official court records show multiple attempts to serve you court papers via certified mail to your home address. Because you failed to respond to any of the summons, the judge granted Terrence a default judgment. It was completely finalized last month. Paralysis quickly gave way to a cold, terrifying clarity. A rapid-fire series of previously mundane memories flashed through my mind, connecting dark, sinister dots I had been far too exhausted to notice before. I remembered Terrence and his sudden, intense obsession with checking the mailbox every afternoon. He took over the chore entirely, claiming he wanted to handle the tedious house administration, so I could focus my energy on my demanding corporate clients. Every single day when I came home, the mail was already sorted on the kitchen counter. Only useless junk mail and utility bills ever made it to my hands. He had intercepted the certified court notices. I remembered his recent string of supposed business trips. For the past month, he claimed he was flying down to Miami to secure vital venture capital funding for his struggling business. In reality, he was attending court hearings right here in Atlanta, ensuring his fraudulent divorce proceedings moved forward without a single hitch. I remembered all the times he casually borrowed my phone, claiming his battery was dead, so he could check a quick email. He had been deleting digital notifications and emails from the county clerk directly from my device. He expertly engineered a default judgment by making absolutely sure I never knew there was a lawsuit to begin with. The massive betrayal hit me with the crushing force of a physical blow to the chest. He did not just cheat on me, he legally assassinated me. He wiped me out of his life on paper while casually continuing to sleep in my bed, eat the food I bought, and use my hard-earned money to fund his pathetic lifestyle. A normal woman might have screamed at the top of her lungs or collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. But I am not a normal woman. I am a strong Black woman who spent her entire adult life solving massive, unpredictable disasters for high-profile corporate clients. I knew exactly how to manage a crisis without losing my composure. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my racing heart rate to steady and my mind to focus. I looked down at the $50 million portfolio resting peacefully on the desk. A brilliant realization suddenly struck me. Because the fraudulent divorce was finalized exactly 32 days ago, Terrence unknowingly severed his legal right to any of this massive inheritance. His desperate, pathetic scam to steal my current assets and blindside me completely locked him out of my massive future empire. Are we legally divorced as of this exact moment? I asked with an eerily calm and calculated voice. Yes, Attorney Sterling replied, watching me with deep, newfound respect. You are legally a single woman, Nia. Terrence has absolutely no claim to your future assets. Good, I said firmly. I picked up the heavy gold fountain pen once again. My hand was no longer shaking. I signed my maiden name, Nia Williams, on the primary beneficiary line with sharp, aggressive strokes. Please process the asset transfer immediately. Attorney Sterling, I said, standing up and smoothing the skirt of my tailored designer suit. I want these assets placed into a secure blind trust by the end of the business day. I will be in touch tomorrow morning to discuss our next strategic moves regarding this property empire. Of course, Nia Sterling said, standing up to shake my hand vigorously. Please let me know if you need referrals for an aggressive family law attorney to address this completely fraudulent divorce. Oh, I will certainly be addressing it, I replied, a cold, dark smile playing on my lips. But I think I need to have a little chat with my former husband first. I walked out of the law office and stepped into the thick, humid Atlanta afternoon air, holding my head high. I got into my luxury car and gripped the leather steering wheel tightly, taking one final quiet moment to fully process the sheer audacity of what Terrence had done. He had played me for an absolute fool. He had used my unconditional love, my fierce loyalty, and my bank account to fund his mediocre life while secretly plotting my sudden demise. He thought I was just a naive, exhausted workaholic who would blindly accept whatever scraps he threw my way once the painful truth finally came out. He drastically underestimated my intelligence and my unyielding resilience. I started the engine and sped toward the beautiful suburban house I had paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears. The drive home was a fast blur of cold, precise calculation. I mapped out exactly what I was going to do. I expected to find a quiet, empty house where I could aggressively tear through his home office, find the hidden divorce decree, and confront him with venom when he returned from his supposed networking lunch. But as I turned onto our quiet, perfectly manicured street, my heart pounded fiercely against my ribs. There were three unfamiliar vehicles parked directly in my driveway. The heavy wooden front door of my house was pushed wide open to the warm afternoon breeze. As I stepped out of my car and walked deliberately up the stone pathway, the loud sound of popping champagne corks and roaring obnoxious laughter spilled out onto the front lawn. It was not a quiet, empty house waiting for my return. It was a loud, festive celebration. The treacherous man who had just stolen my past was inside toasting to his deceptive victory, completely unaware that he had just forfeited a $50 million future. I took a deep, steadying breath and stepped forward into the threshold. I was about to walk right into the middle of his pathetic little party to deliver the absolute worst news of his miserable life. He thought he had outsmarted me, but he had no earthly idea the storm he had just invited into his world. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and prepared to face the man who was about to learn a very expensive and brutal lesson in karma. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and stepped onto the pristine hardwood floor I had meticulously polished myself just last weekend. The pungent smell of cheap grocery store champagne and unearned entitlement hit me instantly. I stood perfectly still in the grand foyer of my own home, watching a scene so completely grotesque it felt almost scripted for a cheap daytime soap opera. My elegant, carefully curated living room had been turned into a chaotic staging ground for a burglary, but the thieves were not wearing ski masks or hiding in the shadows. They were my in-laws, standing right in the open. Terrence stood by the sprawling marble kitchen island, casually pouring another drink. Standing directly next to him was his toxic sister Jasmine, wearing one of my expensive imported silk scarves draped carelessly over her shoulder. Next to her was her husband DeAndre, looking incredibly smug in his poorly fitted wrinkled suit. And kneeling ungracefully by the velvet sofa, carelessly shoving my designer dresses and tailored work suits into cheap black plastic garbage bags, was Chloe. Chloe was the young, naive assistant I had hired 3 years ago to help me manage the minor details at my event planning agency. She was the girl I had mentored, personally trained, and eventually fired when I caught her embezzling petty cash from the office lockbox. Now she was here in my living room wearing my husband's oversized white button-down shirt. I cleared my throat loudly, letting the sound echo through the open concept space. The joyful clinking of champagne glasses stopped immediately. 4 pairs of eyes snapped toward the foyer. The sudden silence in the room was heavy enough to choke on. Nobody panicked or scrambled to hide what they were doing. Nobody looked guilty, ashamed, or even slightly embarrassed by the massive betrayal unfolding in broad daylight. Instead, Terrence took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne and smiled brightly. He leaned back against the granite countertop, crossing his ankles like a man without a single care in the entire world. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," Terrence said, his voice dripping with arrogant amusement. "You are home a bit early, Nia. We were really hoping to have the trash completely cleared out before you got back from your little corporate meetings." I looked down at the shiny black garbage bags piled haphazardly against the pristine white wall. I looked up at the framed wedding photo on the mantel, which had been deliberately placed face down. I looked at Chloe, who had the sheer audacity to quickly avoid my intense gaze and hide cowardly behind Jasmine's shoulder. "What exactly is going on here, Terrence?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any raw emotion. "Why is my former assistant packing my clothes into trash bags, and why are these vultures drinking my vintage champagne in my kitchen?" Jasmine let out a sharp, obnoxious laugh that grated against my ears. She took a large gulp of her drink and looked me up and down with absolute unfiltered disdain. "Your champagne?" she asked, raising an overly plucked eyebrow. "Oh, honey, you really do not pay any attention to the real world, do you?" Terrence set his glass down on the counter and walked slowly toward me, closing the distance between us. He did not look like the desperate man who had cried on my shoulder when his first business venture spectacularly failed. He looked like a predator who thought he had finally cornered his exhausted prey. "It is not your champagne," Nia Terrence stated coldly, standing just a few feet away. "And this is not your beautiful house anymore. It is mine. Every single square foot of it. But I highly suggest you grab whatever scraps Chloe has packed up for you and leave this property quietly before things get unnecessarily ugly." I crossed my arms, staring him down with an unwavering gaze. I already knew the harsh legal reality of the situation thanks to Attorney Sterling, but I needed to hear him confess to the exact mechanics of his pathetic scam. "You cannot simply throw me out of a house I pay the monthly mortgage for," I said, feigning ignorance to stroke his massive ego. "We are legally married, Terrence." "We were married," Terrence corrected me quickly, a wicked, triumphant smirk crossing his handsome face. "Past tense, Nia. I filed the official paperwork for divorce 6 months ago. The county judge finalized everything last month. It was a default judgment because you failed to show up. I get the house. I get the cars. I retain 100% ownership of my logistics company. You get to walk away with the clothes currently on your back." How I demanded, allowing a calculated hint of fake anger to seep into my tone. "I never received a single piece of paper from the court system. I never signed a single document agreeing to this." DeAndre stepped forward, adjusting his cheap tie with a proud, sleazy grin plastered across his face. "That is exactly where I came in." "Little sis," DeAndre said, clearly enjoying his brief moment in the spotlight. "As a certified paralegal, I know exactly how the local court systems operate, and I know exactly how the process servers function. I took care of all the complicated paperwork for my brother. I intercepted the court summons directly from your mailbox every single day, while Terrence kept you busy working those pathetic double shifts to pay the bills. I filed the forged return receipts with the county clerk, swearing under oath that you had been properly and legally served. Because you completely failed to appear in court to defend yourself, Terrence won everything by default. The judge handed him the absolute keys to the kingdom, and you did not even notice the locks changing. The sheer evil of their collaboration was breathtaking to witness. Terrence had not just cheated on my marriage vows. He had actively recruited his toxic family to systematically dismantle my entire life. While I was actively negotiating stressful contracts with vendors to ensure his business website stayed online, he and his brother-in-law were forging federal documents to leave me completely destitute. And Jasmine was right there cheering them on from the sidelines. Jasmine stepped away from the kitchen island and strutted over to me, smelling heavily of the expensive imported perfume she had undoubtedly stolen from my vanity upstairs. "Do not look so incredibly shocked," Nia Jasmine sneered, leaning in close enough for me to smell the alcohol on her breath. "You were always just a temporary stepping stone." Terrence needed solid startup capital and a good credit score to get his life together. He did not need a boring, exhausted workaholic who dresses off the clearance rack and falls asleep at 8 o'clock every night. You served your financial purpose. Now it is time for him to finally upgrade to a real woman. I looked at Jasmine without flinching or breaking eye contact. "An upgrade?" I asked, gesturing lazily toward Chloe. "You mean the foolish girl who could not even properly alphabetize a client guest list without having a severe nervous breakdown in the supply closet. That is his grand, spectacular upgrade." Chloe finally stepped out from behind Jasmine, hearing her name. She stood up straight and pulled the oversized white shirt tight against her body. That was when I saw it clearly. The distinct, round, firm curve of a baby bump protruding from her stomach. She placed a manicured hand on her belly and stroked it gently, giving me a look of pure, triumphant malice. "I might not know how to alphabetize a stupid guest list," Nia Chloe said, her voice sickly sweet and grating. "But I definitely know how to give a man exactly what he actually wants. I am giving him a strong, healthy son. You could not even give him a decent home-cooked meal without constantly complaining about how incredibly tired you were from working all day." The audacity of this little girl was almost funny. She was standing boldly in my house wearing my husband's shirt, carrying a child conceived while I was literally paying the electric bill to keep the lights on for them. Terrence walked over and wrapped a protective arm around Chloe's waist, kissing her temple affectionately. He looked back at me with absolute unmasked contempt. It is completely over, Nia. You lost the game. You worked yourself to the bone for 7 years just to hand me everything I ever wanted on a silver platter. Now it is time for you to pack up your garbage and get out of my sight forever. Terrence reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He flicked his wrist and tossed it carelessly through the air. The paper fluttered down slowly and landed right at the tips of my expensive designer heels. I looked down at the floor. It was a bank check written out from his startup business account. The very same business account I had personally funded with my own savings. The amount was written for exactly $5,000. Consider that a highly generous severance package to help you start over, Terrence said mockingly, crossing his arms. You can rent a nice little studio apartment somewhere far out of my way. Now grab your garbage bags and get out before I call the police and have you formally arrested for trespassing on my private property. The entire room watched me closely, waiting for the inevitable emotional breakdown. They fully expected me to fall to my knees in agony. They expected me to scream and cry and beg pathetically for my beautiful home back. They expected me to shatter into a million irreparable pieces right there in the foyer. I looked calmly at the crumpled check resting on the floor. I looked at Jasmine's smug face and DeAndre's sleazy, victorious grin. I looked at Chloe proudly stroking her pregnant belly. Then I looked dead into Terrence's eyes, piercing straight through his hollow soul. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or show any sign of weakness. Instead, I let out a dark, chilling laugh. It started low in my chest and rapidly grew into a sound so cold and deeply menacing that the arrogant smiles on their faces instantly faltered. The dark laughter echoed off the high ceilings of the foyer, slicing through the heavy tension like a newly sharpened butcher blade. Terrence took a slight, uncertain step backward, his bold bravado slipping just a fraction. "What is so damn funny?" he demanded, his voice suddenly losing its confident, dominant edge. I bent down with perfect, elegant poise and picked up the crumpled check from the floor. I held it up between my manicured fingers, showing it clearly to everyone in the room. $5,000, I said softly, my voice dripping with lethal, unapologetic amusement. You stole 7 years of my life, forged federal court documents, and committed grand larceny just to offer me a $5,000 severance package. I pinched the edges of the paper and ripped the check clean in half. Then I ripped it again and let the torn pieces flutter back down to the hardwood floor, like worthless, pathetic confetti. I turned around and grabbed the handle of the single sleek suitcase I had brought with me from the car. I did not need the cheap garbage bags Chloe had packed. I did not need anything from this contaminated, disgusting house. I looked back at Terrence, locking my eyes onto his. "You think you won a house in a failing startup?" I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "But you just legally locked yourself out of an empire." I adjusted my grip on my suitcase and gave him one final pitying look. "You just signed your own death warrant." I turned on my heel and walked out the front door, letting it slam shut behind me. The crisp evening air felt like a cleansing breath. I did not look back at the house I had painstakingly decorated. Let them have the crown molding and the stainless steel appliances. They were fighting over crumbs while I had just inherited the entire bakery. I loaded my single suitcase into the trunk of my car and drove straight to a luxury hotel. I handed my keys to the valet, tipped him with a crisp $100 bill, and marched to the reception. I booked the largest presidential penthouse suite they had available, paying for a full month in advance. The receptionist handed me the heavy brass keycard with a practiced smile. I stepped into the elevator and watched the floor numbers climb higher and higher. Normal women might have thrown themselves onto the plush, king-sized hotel bed and wept into the expensive pillows. Normal women might have called their girlfriends to complain about the unfairness of the universe. I did not shed a single tear. There was no breakdown. There was no crying over spilled, disgusting, cheap grocery store champagne. I walked straight to the mahogany desk in the corner of the suite, opened my laptop, and connected to the secure internet. I pulled out my phone and dialed Attorney Sterling on a video call. He answered on the second ring, sitting in his dimly lit office with a concerned look on his face. "Nia," he said, examining my expression through the digital screen. "You look remarkably calm for a woman who just discovered her marriage was a scam." "I am completely fine, Sterling," I replied, pulling up a blank spreadsheet on my screen. "I need you to execute now. Take the entire $50 million portfolio and place it securely into a private blind trust. I want my name completely shielded by multiple layers of corporate entities. Make absolutely sure that Terrence cannot find a single trace of this money if he searches the public records." Sterling nodded, typing rapidly on his keyboard. "Consider it done, Nia. The trust is already drafted, and the transfer will be finalized by morning. What is our next move?" "My next move is finding out exactly how much rope Terrence has hung himself with," I said. "I want a full forensic audit today. I am going to tear his life apart, spreadsheet by spreadsheet." I hung up the call and cracked my knuckles. For 7 years, I had been the silent architect behind Terrence and his logistics startup. I knew his passwords. I knew his banking routines. I knew the exact locations of his digital skeletons. I logged into the shared financial accounts he had not yet bothered to change the passwords for. He was so incredibly arrogant that he assumed I would just roll over and accept my defeat. His supreme overconfidence was his ultimate vulnerability, as I dug deep into it. The business accounts, a sickening realization washed over me. I saw the hidden ledger. For over a year, Terrence had been siphoning the substantial salary I brought home from my corporate event planning job. He had been quietly funneling my hard-earned cash into a shadow account. While I was skipping lunch and shopping the clearance racks to ensure his business stayed afloat, he was buying Chloe designer handbags and booking weekend getaways to Miami. He had manipulated me into believing the startup was just going through a rough patch, forcing me to work grueling double shifts to cover everything. The deficit. He bled me dry to finance his infidelity. The anger did not overwhelm me, it sharpened my focus into a lethal weapon. I opened the portfolio documents Attorney Sterling had emailed me earlier that afternoon. The $50 million inheritance consisted of several prime commercial real estate properties scattered across the most lucrative districts in Atlanta. My biological father might have been an absent parent, but the man possessed an undeniable genius for acquiring valuable land. I scanned the list of high-rise office buildings, retail centers, and industrial warehouses. As my eyes scrolled down the extensive pages, a specific street name caught my attention. It was a massive premium glass and steel commercial high-rise located squarely in the heart of downtown Atlanta. I recognized the address immediately. I quickly opened a second tab on my browser and pulled up the commercial lease agreement for Terrence and his logistics startup. He had signed a 10-year lease for his corporate headquarters just 8 months ago, bragging constantly about the prestigious location and the panoramic city views from his corner office. I cross-referenced the address on his lease agreement with the property deed inside my inheritance folder. The numbers matched perfectly. The suite numbers aligned. The building owner listed on his lease was a holding company. That exact holding company was now 100% legally owned by my private trust. A slow, sinister smile spread across my face. Terrence thought he had completely outsmarted me by stealing my suburban house. He had absolutely no idea that I was now legally his corporate landlord. I literally owned the roof over his arrogant head. But I was not finished digging into him. The deeper I looked into the startup financial records, the worse the entire picture truly became. Terrence was bleeding cash at an alarming rate. His logistics company was nothing more than a hollow shell game. He was losing clients left and right due to his sheer incompetence and staggering laziness. He had been using the stolen money from my salary to artificially inflate his revenue numbers, pretending he was a successful young tech mogul for his social media followers. But my salary alone was not nearly enough to cover the massive overhead costs of his expensive downtown office and his extravagant lifestyle with Chloe. He needed a massive injection of capital to keep his fraudulent business operating. I found the electronic paper trail buried in a folder labeled Miscellaneous Expenses. Terrence had not secured traditional venture capital funding like he claimed. No legitimate bank or investment firm would ever approve a loan for a company with such disastrous profit margins. Instead, he had used DeAndre and his shady paralegal connections. DeAndre had bypassed the standard banking regulations and secured a massive high-interest private commercial loan from a notoriously ruthless predatory lender in the city. The terms of the loan were absolutely brutal. The interest rate was astronomical and the repayment schedule was extremely suffocating today. But the most shocking part was the collateral. Terrence had legally pledged every single asset his startup owned, including his proprietary logistics software, his client list, and his office equipment. If he defaulted on a single payment, the lender had the immediate legal right to seize the entire company and liquidate everything. He was drowning in toxic debt. He had forged a divorce decree to steal my assets simply because he was desperate to pay off this predatory loan before the commercial lender came to break his kneecaps. He sacrificed my life to save his own rapidly sinking corporate ship. I leaned back in the plush leather chair and stared at the glowing computer screen. The pieces of the puzzle fit together beautifully. Terrence was sitting in a house he stole, drinking champagne he did not buy, celebrating a victory he had not actually won. He thought he was the master manipulator, but he was nothing more than a desperate broke man dancing blindly on the edge of an enormous cliff. And I was standing right behind him with my hands resting firmly on his back. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Attorney Sterling again late that night. The lawyer answered immediately, looking slightly concerned by my late-night call. "Nia, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice laced with professional urgency. "Everything is absolutely perfect, Sterling," I replied, staring at the financial documents illuminating my face in the dark hotel suite. "I need you to do some immediate aggressive corporate maneuvering for me right now. I just emailed you a copy of a private commercial loan agreement. My former husband currently owes a massive amount of money to a predatory lending firm. They hold the complete collateral rights to his entire logistics startup business operation right now. I want you to contact that shady commercial lender first thing tomorrow morning." Sterling looked at the document on his screen and raised his eyebrows. "Naya, this is highly toxic debt. The interest premium on this note is completely outrageous. No sensible investor would ever want to acquire this financial liability." "I am not a sensible investor, Sterling," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "I am an extremely angry woman with $50 million and a massive score to settle. Contact that commercial lender first thing. I absolutely do not care about the premium. Buy out his debt immediately." Sterling did not argue with me. When a woman with a fresh $50 million portfolio tells her seasoned attorney to jump, he simply asks how high she wants to go. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the aggressive legal machinery was already in full motion. Sterling contacted the shady commercial lender, representing my newly formed anonymous shell corporation aptly named Genesis Holdings, LLC. The predatory lenders were absolutely thrilled to offload Terrence and his toxic high-risk debt for a premium buyout. They cared entirely about quick, liquid cash, not the long-term survival of a failing logistics startup managed by a fraudulent, arrogant CEO. Within 48 short hours, the extensive, complicated paperwork was entirely finalized, signed, and securely filed away in digital vaults. I was now officially the sole undisputed owner of Terrence Jamal Davis and his pathetic little company. The strict, unforgiving terms of the original private loan remained fully intact, and they were absolutely brutal in their financial design. If he missed a single scheduled monthly payment by even one solitary minute, I retained the immediate legal right to foreclose on his business, seize all corporate assets, and liquidate his proprietary software for parts. He was completely at my mercy, and he did not even know my name was printed boldly on the execution order. I poured myself a steaming cup of dark roast coffee and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury penthouse suite watching the busy Atlanta traffic flow far beneath me. The sheer unadulterated power of anonymous wealth was profoundly intoxicating. But the deeper I relentlessly audited the old financial records, the more my cold calculation fueled a burning, unquenchable inner rage. I opened the heavily encrypted folders containing the startup expense reports from the past 18 months. I meticulously cross-referenced the corporate spending with my own personal banking statements from the exact same time period. The ugly truth laid bare in black and white spreadsheets was utterly disgusting and deeply, deeply offensive. For over a year, Terrence had systematically siphoned my hard-earned salary under the false guise of emergency business capital. I remembered those desperate, tearful conversations in our dimly lit kitchen. I remembered him burying his handsome face in his hands, telling me the shipping servers were going to completely crash and burn if we did not inject another $10,000 into the operating budget by midnight. I had foolishly emptied my emergency savings account. I had skipped essential car maintenance. I had worked exhausting back-to-back double shifts organizing highly demanding corporate galas just to keep his arrogant head above water. He had looked me right in my exhausted, bloodshot eyes and expertly gaslit me into believing his company was just going through a temporary rough patch. He told me I was his rock, his ultimate savior, his equal partner in the corporate grind. That was a massive, sickening lie. The money I bled for did not go to shipping servers or basic operational costs. The bank transaction histories showed massive frequent wire transfers to luxury retail boutiques across the city. He used my blood, sweat, and tears to buy Chloe limited edition designer handbags, imported red-bottom shoes, and extravagant, luxurious spa weekends. While I was wearing scuffed heels and eating leftover cold catering from my exhausting events, my own husband was actively funding a lavish sugar daddy lifestyle for a 26-year-old former assistant who could barely compose a coherent business email. He took my blind devotion and weaponized it to finance his blatant infidelity. The sheer audacity of his financial abuse made my chest tighten painfully, but I absolutely refused to let the anger cloud my sharp judgment. Anger is messy and loud. Vengeance is beautifully organized and completely silent. I made absolutely certain that my true identity was buried deep beneath thick layers of impenetrable ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Genesis Holdings, LLC, traced back to a registered agent in Delaware, which then pointed directly to another obscure corporate entity in Wyoming. Terrence could hire the best private investigators in the entire state of Georgia, and they would never, ever find my name attached to his mounting debt. He was operating completely in the dark without a single flashlight. Meanwhile, I hired an elite, discreet private security firm to keep a very close, watchful eye on my old suburban house. The detailed daily reports they sent me were almost comical in their predictable, tragic vanity. Terrence and Chloe were living like fake royalty in the beautiful home I had personally paid for. They threw lavish, loud pool parties catered by outrageously expensive local restaurants. They hired a premium landscaping crew to aggressively tear up my prized imported rose garden just to make room for a custom outdoor fire pit. Chloe was frequently photographed by my security team strutting down the wide concrete driveway, carrying the exact same expensive designer bags my late working nights had unknowingly funded. They were parading around the affluent neighborhood, boasting loudly about their newfound wealth and their upcoming baby, completely unaware of the massive Category 5 financial storm brewing directly above their heads. Terrence genuinely believed he had executed the absolute perfect crime. He truly believed his forged default divorce had permanently severed my legal ties to the property, leaving him free to reign supreme. He strutted into his leased downtown office building every single morning, totally oblivious to the glorious fact that his monthly rent checks were essentially being deposited straight into my newly established trust fund. I was his demanding landlord. I was his ruthless bank. I was the invisible puppeteer holding every single string attached to his miserable, pathetic life. I had built the perfect invisible cage around him, and all I had to do was patiently wait for him to carelessly rattle the bars. The first of the month was rapidly approaching. His massive debt payment would be automatically drafted. Given the disastrous, crumbling state of his internal revenue, I knew his business accounts were dangerously thin. He was going to miss a payment very soon. The heavy steel trap was perfectly set, and the bait was securely on the hook. But a quiet, private destruction was simply not good enough for a man who had publicly humiliated me and legally assassinated my character. Terrence deeply loved the bright spotlight. He desperately craved social validation and corporate prestige more than he craved oxygen. He wanted to be a prominent fixture in the competitive Atlanta business scene. If I was going to violently strip him of his stolen kingdom, I was going to do it directly in front of a massive, eager audience. I wanted him to feel the exact same agonizing public embarrassment he had planned for me when he tossed that garbage check at my feet. I wanted the arrogant golden child of his toxic family to realize precisely what he foolishly threw away while the entire city watched him fall from grace. I picked up my phone and slowly scrolled through my extensive list of powerful corporate contacts. During my long, grueling years as an elite event director, I had meticulously cultivated incredibly strong relationships with the most influential media figures in the city. I found the contact card for Julian Pierce, a highly prominent, aggressive business journalist for the leading financial magazine in the entire Southeast. Julian was notoriously famous for breaking massive corporate stories and ruthlessly exposing industry frauds. We had worked together on several high-profile charity galas, and he owed me a massive professional favor. I tapped his number and listened to the line ring. He answered with his usual brisk, professional tone, expecting a standard pitch. "Julian," I said, my voice exceptionally smooth and commanding. "It is Nia Williams. I have an exclusive front-page story that will absolutely break your readership records this month. I just inherited a $50 million commercial real estate empire, and I am ready to do my very first major profile interview." I paused deliberately, letting the sheer staggering magnitude of the number sink into his sharp journalistic brain. I could hear his breath hitch over the receiver. I knew Julian was the perfect man for this particular job. He was hungry for dramatic, high-stakes narratives that exposed the hidden underbelly of Atlanta corporate society. I told him I would provide full verified documentation of the inheritance, including the official trust paperwork, verified by my legal team within the hour. The sheer excitement radiating from his end of the phone was palpable. He immediately cleared his editorial schedule and promised to deploy his best photography crew to my penthouse suite by tomorrow morning. I smiled, looking out at the glittering skyline. The narrative was officially out of my treacherous former husband's deceitful hands. The countdown to his total, absolute ruin had officially begun. But there is a very specific condition, Julian. I want the article published immediately, and I want my face on the digital front cover. Let them know exactly who they threw away. Julian Pierce was a man of his word. 48 hours after our phone call, the Atlanta Business Chronicle dropped their special online weekend edition. The digital front cover was an absolute masterpiece of high fashion and corporate dominance. I was seated in a velvet wingback chair, wearing a tailored crimson power suit, my hair perfectly styled, and my expression radiating cold, untouchable authority. The brilliant photography perfectly captured my transition from an exhausted suburban wife to an elite corporate powerhouse. The bold gold headline plastered across the screen read, "Local Event Director Nia Williams inherits $50 million real estate empire." The subheading was even better, detailing how the quiet mastermind behind Atlanta's biggest corporate galas had just stepped out of the shadows to claim her biological father's massive commercial portfolio. I sat in my penthouse suite sipping green tea and watching the analytics skyrocket. The bait was officially in the water. I smiled to myself. It was time to watch the sharks choke on it. Across town, inside the leased commercial office building that I now secretly owned, Terrence Jamal Davis was having a very bad morning. He was sitting behind his cheap veneer desk, desperately reviewing his abysmal financial projections. The predatory loan he had taken out was breathing down his neck. He took a long sip of his lukewarm black coffee, trying to massage the growing tension headache behind his eyes. His computer suddenly chimed with an urgent news alert from his local business networking group. Terrence casually dragged his mouse over and clicked the notification. The high-resolution crimson-suited image of his discarded wife filled his entire 27-inch monitor. Terrence inhaled sharply and violently spat his mouthful of coffee all over his keyboard and his expensive silk tie. He coughed and sputtered wildly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand as he leaned closer to the bright screen. He read the headline once. He read it a second time. his brain completely short-circuited trying to process the impossible words. $50 million. Real estate empire. Nia Williams. Julian had brilliantly detailed the exact timeline of the inheritance process. The article explicitly noted that the estate transfer had been finalized just days ago, but the legal wheels had been in motion for nearly 2 months. The devastating realization of what he had done paralyzed him completely. A heavy, suffocating weight crashed down onto Terrence's chest. He dropped his coffee mug, letting it shatter against the floor. The timeline. The timeline was the undeniable ultimate dagger. He had authorized DeAndre to intercept my mail and forged those return receipts exactly 6 months ago. He had pushed the judge for an expedited default judgment, which was officially stamped and finalized exactly 32 days ago. He had legally severed his marriage to me 1 single month before I claimed the money. If he had just waited. If he had just been a normal cheating husband who asked for a standard divorce. If he had just stayed legally married for 4 more miserable weeks, he would have been legally entitled to fight for half of a $50 million fortune under state marital asset laws. He had successfully scammed me out of a suburban house with a leaking roof and an underwater logistics company. By doing so, he had aggressively and permanently locked himself out of generational wealth. Terrence gripped the edges of his desk until his knuckles turned completely white. A guttural sound of pure, unadulterated agony ripped through his throat. He had thrown away a winning lottery ticket just to steal a shiny penny. The glass door to his corner office suddenly flew open, hitting the wall with a violent crack. Jasmine and DeAndre burst into the room looking like they had just seen a ghost. "Did you see it?" Jasmine screamed, her voice shrill and echoing through the entire office floor. "Tell me you saw the article, Terrence. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." Terrence stared at his sister, his face entirely drained of blood. "It is real," he whispered hollowly. "It is everywhere online." DeAndre slammed his hands down on the edge of Terrence's desk, sending papers scattering. $50 million! DeAndre yelled, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Do you understand what we just did? Do you understand the magnitude of what we threw away?" Jasmine lunged forward, pointing a shaking manicured finger right at Terrence's face. "You absolute idiot," she shrieked. "You had to have your precious freedom right now. You had to move Chloe into the house immediately. I told you to just wait. I told you to handle the divorce normally." The irony was completely lost on her. "But no, you wanted to be a clever big shot and steal the house out from under her. You played us all, Terrence. You cost our family an empire." "Do not put this on me, Jasmine." Terrence roared, his veins popping in his neck. "You were the one cheering me on. You were the one calling her a stepping stone. You could not wait to get her out of the family so you could parade Chloe around at the country club." Jasmine scoffed, waving her hands wildly. "Chloe is nothing. Chloe is a broke 26-year-old pregnant girl who cannot even pay her own phone bill. Nia is a $50 million real estate mogul. You traded a literal diamond mine for a piece of cheap plastic." DeAndre ran his hands nervously over his bald head, sweat beading on his forehead. The sheer stupidity of their actions was finally catching up to them. "We are completely ruined," DeAndre muttered, his voice shaking with absolute dread. "Do you know what kind of legal trouble I am in if she ever finds out about the forged summons? I used my law firm's notary stamp to bypass the process server requirements. If Nia hires a decent attorney to look into that default judgment, I will lose my paralegal license. I will go to federal prison, Terrence." Terrence rounded the desk and grabbed DeAndre by the lapels of his suit, pushing him roughly against the glass wall. "This was your job," DeAndre. Terrence growled, his face inches from his brother-in-law. "You told me the default judgment was a brilliant loophole. You rushed the paperwork. You stamped the documents. You were the legal expert who promised me a clean break." DeAndre shoved Terrence away violently. "I did exactly what you paid me to do. I got you the house. I secured your failing business. It is not my fault you failed to realize your boring little wife was a secret heiress. You slept next to the woman for 7 years, and you had no earthly idea who her father was. You are the absolute worst businessman in the entire history of Atlanta." The three of them stood in the center of the office, panting heavily, the toxic blame game temporarily exhausted. The crushing reality of their massive blunder hung heavily over them. They had spent years mocking my clothes, belittling my career, and treating me like an indentured servant. They thought they were the smartest people in the room. Now they were just three desperate broke frauds staring at a screen that mocked their monumental stupidity. Terrence slowly straightened his silk tie, taking deep, ragged breaths. His narcissistic brain could simply not accept absolute defeat. His ego was his ultimate downfall, blinding him to reality. He refused to believe that he had been permanently outplayed by the woman he had effortlessly manipulated for nearly a decade. He paced to the large glass window, looking out at the glittering city skyline, and a dangerous, delusional calm washed over his face. "Stop panicking," Terrence said, his voice dropping to a smooth, manipulative octave. "You are all acting like it is completely over. It is not over." Jasmine crossed her arms, glaring at him. "She is legally single, Terrence. You have zero claim. The money is completely gone. It is only gone if the divorce stands." Terrence replied, a slick, arrogant smile returning to his lips. "You are forgetting one very important detail, Jasmine. Nia loved me. She worshipped the ground I walked on for 7 years. She worked double shifts just to buy me a birthday watch. She is a loyal, desperate romantic. She is probably sitting in a hotel room right now, crying her eyes out, missing me. I will just go to her. I will apologize. I will tell her I made a terrible mistake and that I was deeply stressed about the business. She will take me back in a heartbeat." DeAndre looked skeptical. "And the default judgment." Terrence grabbed his car keys and his designer sunglasses from the wooden desk. "I will just get the divorce annulled. I will file a motion to set aside the judgment immediately. We will be legally married again by the end of the month, and half of that 50 million will be mine. I know exactly how to play her." Terrence confidently walked toward the office door, completely blind to the glorious fact that he was marching straight into a slaughterhouse. "It is fine," Terrence told them, adjusting his suit jacket. "I can fix this easily. She loved me for 7 years. I will just go to her hotel right now and remind her who her husband is." I sat in the opulent lobby of the St. Regis, a half-empty crystal flute of sparkling water resting on the marble table beside me. The atmosphere was a symphony of quiet luxury, filled with the soft melodies of a grand piano and the gentle murmur of wealthy patrons negotiating multi-million-dollar deals over artisanal pastries. I was wearing a stunning emerald green sheath dress that hugged my curves, perfectly paired with flawless makeup and an aura of absolute untouchability. I knew Terrence was coming. I had practically left a glowing neon trail leading directly to my current residence. My private security detail had already alerted me the moment his cheap leased sedan sped past the valet stand. I took a slow sip of my water, savoring the crisp chill, and prepared my facial expressions for the performance of a lifetime. I needed to look like a heartbroken, vulnerable woman desperately yearning for the toxic love she had just lost. It was a role I had played authentically for 7 exhausting years, so slipping back into character was effortless. The heavy revolving glass doors spun wildly as Terrence burst into the pristine lobby. He looked absolutely frantic, his designer suit jacket flapping open, his expensive tie completely discarded, and his chest heaving with exertion. His eyes darted around the expansive room like a desperate, starving animal searching for its next meal. The moment his gaze locked onto me, too, sitting serenely in the velvet armchair, his entire demeanor dramatically shifted. He immediately switched from a panicked fraudster into the tragic, remorseful romantic lead. He rushed across the polished marble floor, completely ignoring the disapproving glances of the elite hotel guests and the vigilant security guards tracking his every erratic movement. "Nia," he gasped, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion as he collapsed onto the floor right at my feet. He literally dropped to his knees, ignoring the expensive fabric of his trousers scraping against the hard marble. He reached out and desperately grabbed my hands, burying his face into my palms. "Nia, my beautiful Nia, please look at me. Please listen to me. I have made the most catastrophic mistake of my entire life." I stared down at the top of his head, forcing my facial muscles to convey a mixture of profound shock and lingering affection. Internally, my stomach churned with pure, unadulterated disgust. The sheer theatricality of his performance was nauseating. Just days ago, this very same man had stood proudly in my foyer, wrapped his arm around his pregnant mistress, and tossed a crumpled $5,000 check at my designer heels like I was a worthless peasant begging for scraps. He had commanded me to pack my garbage bags and vacate the property he had fraudulently stolen. Now, because he realized I held the keys to a $50 million kingdom, he was weeping on the floor of a hotel lobby like a pathetic broken child. "Terrence, what are you doing here?" I whispered, keeping my voice soft, trembling, and perfectly pitched to project deep emotional conflict. "You need to leave. You made your choice. You chose Chloe. You chose the house. You threw me away." "No, no, no, you do not understand," he cried, lifting his face to look at me. His eyes were actually red, brimming with forced crocodile tears that he had likely spent the entire car ride summoning. "I was completely manipulated, Nia. I was not in my right mind. The business was failing, the stress was literally crushing me, and I was drowning. Jasmine and DeAndre, they got into my head. They poisoned my thoughts against you. They convinced me that you were holding me back, that I needed to take drastic measures to save my company. It was all DeAndre's twisted idea to file the paperwork behind your back. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so lost and confused. I gently pulled one of my hands free from his frantic grip and pressed it against my chest, feigning a sharp gasp of betrayal. You expect me to believe that your sister and brother-in-law forced you to sleep with my former assistant? You expect me to believe they forced you to get her pregnant in our bed? Chloe means absolutely nothing to me. Terrence spat the venom in his voice, remarkably genuine when he spoke her name. He waved his hand dismissively, as if brushing away an annoying insect. She was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless distraction. The baby is just a massive complication that Jasmine pushed on me. I do not love her, Nia. I have never loved her. I only love you. You are my wife. You have always been my only rock, my foundation, my entire world. I was just too blind and stressed to see what was right in front of me. Please, baby, you have to forgive me. We belong together. We are a powerful team." I looked down at his pleading, desperate face. He was laying all the blame squarely on the shoulders of his loyal flying monkeys. He was throwing Jasmine, DeAndre, and his pregnant mistress directly under the bus without a single second of hesitation, solely to get his greedy hands on my newfound wealth. The absolute lack of loyalty he possessed was astounding. He was a parasite willing to devour his own family to survive. I masked the burning hatred in my eyes with a soft, mournful gaze, letting a single perfectly timed tear slip down my cheek. "Terrence, it is too late," I whispered, my voice breaking beautifully. "The judge already finalized the default judgment. You made sure of that. We are not a team anymore. You legally erased our marriage. We are divorced. It is completely over. I cannot just pretend none of this happened." Terrence scrambled closer, his eyes lighting up with the frantic, manic energy of a gambler who thinks he has figured out how to beat the house. "No, it is not too late," he insisted, eagerly squeezing my hand tight enough to hurt. "We can fix this, Nia. I can fix this. The law is flexible. We can go straight to the courthouse together. We can file a motion to set aside the default judgment. We can tell the judge that there was a massive misunderstanding, that we have reconciled, and that we want the divorce completely reversed. We can legally undo the entire thing. We can be a family again, just like we always planned. Just you and me building our future." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, appearing as though I was deeply conflicted, wrestling with my lingering love for him and the pain of his betrayal. In reality, I was marveling at how perfectly he was walking into the massive, lethal bear trap I had meticulously laid out for him. The arrogant fool actually thought reversing a federal court order was as simple as returning a sweater to a department store. He was so blinded by the glowing neon signs of a $50 million payout that he completely failed to recognize the legal suicide he was eagerly proposing. "I do not know, Terrence," I said, looking away, wrapping my arms around myself to project extreme vulnerability. "You broke my heart into a million pieces. You humiliated me in front of your entire family. How can I possibly trust that you actually want me back and not just the money my father left me. I do not care about the money, Terence lied smoothly, his voice dropping to a serious, fervent whisper. I swear to you on my life, Nia, I did not even read that article properly. I only care about you. I realized my massive mistake the second you walked out of that house. The house feels completely empty without you. My life is empty without you. Let me prove it to you. Let me show you how far I am willing to go to fix this broken marriage. Let me make this right. I slowly turned my gaze back to him, letting a small, fragile glimmer of hope reflect in my eyes. I took a deep, shaky breath, playing the role of the desperate, forgiving wife to absolute perfection. If you truly want me back, Terence, I said softly, enunciating every single word with deliberate precision. If you want us to be a husband and wife again, you have to be the one to fix the paperwork. I will not lift a single finger to clean up the legal mess you created with DeAndre. If you want this marriage restored, you have to go to the courthouse and reverse the judgment yourself. You have to handle the filings, the motions, everything. Prove to me that you are willing to fight for us. Prove to me that you can be a real man and fix your own mistakes. Terrence's face instantly illuminated with a triumphant, victorious smile. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed his pathetic, groveling performance had successfully melted my frozen heart and secured his immediate access to my sweeping real estate empire. He saw a clear, unobstructed path straight to the bank. Yes, absolutely yes, Terence exclaimed, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. He kissed the back of my hand repeatedly, his eyes wide with manic joy. I will handle every single piece of paperwork, Nia. I promise you. I will go to the county courthouse first thing tomorrow morning. I will file the exact motion to set aside the judgment. I will take full responsibility for fixing this. I will make us whole again. Just wait for me, baby. I will make this right. Terence hastily scrambled to his feet, vigorously brushing the dust off his expensive suit pants. He leaned down, attempting to kiss my forehead, but I subtly tilted my head, letting his lips brush against my styled hair instead. He was too distracted by his perceived monumental victory to notice the slight rejection. He flashed me one last dazzling, arrogant smile, completely rejuvenated, before turning around and practically sprinting out of the hotel lobby, eager to secure his fraudulent claim to my fortune. I sat back in the plush velvet armchair, slowly wiping the spot on my hand where his lips had touched me. The fragile, conflicted expression vanished from my face, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless smirk. Terence was rushing to the courthouse, blindingly eager to file a motion to set aside the default judgment. But his supreme arrogance and absolute lack of legal knowledge blinded him to one massive, fatal detail. He did not realize that in order to successfully reverse a finalized default judgment, he could not just tell the judge it was a simple misunderstanding. He would be legally required to submit a sworn, notarized affidavit directly to the presiding judge, explaining exactly why the original process was flawed. He would have to officially confess on federal record under penalty of perjury that he had deliberately hidden the legal summons from his wife, intercepted her mail, and falsified the return receipts. He was practically sprinting to the courthouse to officially hand a signed sworn confession of procedural fraud and grand perjury directly to a federal judge. And he was doing it all with a massive smile on his face, genuinely believing it would make him a millionaire. I picked up my crystal flute of sparkling water, raised it toward the heavy revolving glass doors he had just disappeared through, and took a slow, victorious sip. The trap had just snapped completely shut. The very next morning, the Atlanta courthouse opened its heavy glass doors at exactly 8 o'clock. Terence was the first person standing in the security line. He buzzed with frantic energy, wearing the same wrinkled suit from the hotel lobby yesterday. His mind was consumed by visions of unfettered access to my $50 million real estate empire. He marched to the family court clerk window, ignoring the exhausted government employees. He announced he needed to file a motion to set aside a default judgment of divorce. The board clerk handed him legal forms and pointed him toward a small desk in the corner. Terence grabbed the cheap plastic pen. He did not stop to read the dense legal warnings printed at the top of the official document. He was blinded by pure, unadulterated greed. He flipped straight to the sworn affidavit section. The form demanded a detailed, legally binding explanation as to why the default judgment should be reversed. Terrence saw this blank space as his golden ticket. He eagerly began to write. He wrote down that his wife never received the original divorce summons. He wrote down that he had intercepted the certified mail from our home mailbox because he was suffering from financial stress and was not thinking clearly. He documented that he had deliberately concealed the legal proceedings from me. He detailed his exact method of procedural fraud in his own distinct handwriting. He believed he was crafting a touching narrative about a confused husband who wanted his wife back. He thought the judge would read his heartfelt confession and grant him his marriage back. He took the completed forms back to the clerk. He raised his right hand, swore under penalty of federal perjury that every word written on those pages was the absolute truth, and signed his full legal name. The clerk stamped the paperwork with a loud thud. Terrence walked out of the courthouse, unaware that he had just handed the federal government a signed, sealed, and notarized confession to grand procedural fraud. Later that afternoon, I was sitting comfortably across from Attorney Sterling in his mahogany-paneled office. Today, the air was thick with the sweet smell of impending victory. A sharp chime echoed from Sterling's computer monitor. It was the notification system from the county court digital portal. Sterling clicked the notification and his eyes scanned the screen rapidly. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his weathered face. He reached forward and pressed the print button. The laser printer hummed to life, sliding out crisp pages of legal documents. Sterling gathered the papers, stapled the corner, and slid the stack across the wooden desk toward me. "You are a profoundly dangerous woman, Nia," he said, his voice laced with professional awe. He actually did it. He filed the motion without consulting a single attorney. I picked up the document and read through Terrence's handwritten affidavit. It was a masterpiece of stupidity. He had proudly outlined his entire illegal scheme, detailing the dates he intercepted the mail and the specific methods he used to bypass the process server. He had signed his name right below the bold text warning about the criminal penalties for committing perjury. I gently placed the document back onto the desk and leaned back in my chair. Sterling stood up, walked over to a crystal decanter resting on a side table, and poured 2 generous glasses of single malt scotch. He walked back over and handed me a heavy glass tumbler. We gently clinked our glasses together, the sharp, ringing sound serving as a celebration of Terrence's downfall. To the arrogance of desperate men, I said, taking a slow, smooth sip of the burning amber liquid. Sterling chuckled, taking his seat. "We now have his signed confession of fraud on the federal record. The judge will read this motion and immediately refer him to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Your $50 million inheritance is bulletproof. He cannot touch a single dime of it." I swirled the scotch in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light of the office lamp. The legal victory was undeniably sweet, but it was not enough. Terrence had humiliated me publicly. He paraded his pregnant mistress through my home and tossed a garbage check at my feet. I did not just want him to lose in court. I wanted his entire world to crumble into dust while he was still standing in the middle of it. I set my empty glass down on the desk with a definitive thud. The time for waiting was officially over. "We are not going to wait for the scheduled court date, Sterling," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, authoritative register. "I want to initiate phase 2 of the operation right now." Sterling raised his eyebrows, setting his glass down. "You want to execute the commercial debt trap today?" I nodded, pulling a black folder out of my designer handbag. The folder contained the extensive paperwork for Genesis Holdings LLC, the anonymous corporate entity I had used to purchase the massive predatory loan suffocating Terrence's logistics startup. "Yes," I replied, tapping the folder sharply. Terrence is sitting in his leased downtown office, high on his own delusional supply. He thinks he just won the lottery by filing that ridiculous court motion. I want to rip the rug out from under him before he even has a chance to celebrate. I opened the folder and pointed to a specific, heavily bolded paragraph buried within the predatory loan agreement. According to the original terms agreed upon by Terrence and the shady commercial lender, the creditor retains the absolute right to demand immediate repayment of the entire loan balance in the event of a material change in management or a significant shift in corporate liability. Terrence just filed a federal court document admitting to grand fraud and perjury. That is a massive corporate liability. I want Genesis Holdings LLC to send his startup an immediate aggressive demand for total loan repayment right this second. Sterling's eyes gleamed with legal appreciation. He summoned his senior paralegal into the office and dictated the brutal demand letter. The language was cold, unforgiving, and impenetrable. It stated that Genesis Holdings LLC was calling in the entire massive debt due to a catastrophic breach of the management liability clauses. The letter demanded payment in full within 24 hours. If the payment was not received, the holding company would exercise its legal right to immediately seize all corporate assets, liquidate the proprietary software, and lock the doors of the commercial headquarters. Sterling printed the demand letter, placed it inside a stark red courier envelope, and handed it to a private aggressive courier service with strict instructions for immediate direct delivery to Terrence Jamal Davis. The trap was fully loaded, and the trigger had just been pulled. Across the city, Terrence was sitting behind his cheap veneer desk in his office. He was leaning back in his chair with his feet propped up on the desk, feeling like an absolute conqueror. He spent the morning bragging to his sister Jasmine on the phone about how easily he manipulated me. The heavy glass door swung open. His receptionist stepped inside holding a bright red courier envelope. She placed it on his desk and retreated quickly. Terrence ripped the envelope open, pulling out the thick stack of legal documents. His arrogant smile vanished instantly. Demand for immediate total repayment. Breach of corporate liability clauses. Imminent seizure of all business assets. Terrence felt the blood drain from his face. His heart slammed against his ribs with terrifying force. The massive predatory loan he took out to keep his fraudulent lifestyle afloat was being called in all at once. There was no backup plan. He had zero liquid capital. DeAndre could not save him this time because this was way above his pay grade. The crushing weight of absolute financial ruin pressed down on his chest, making it entirely impossible to breathe properly. He frantically wiped a bead of cold sweat from his brow. He flipped to the second page, desperately searching for contact information. He saw the bold letterhead for Genesis Holdings LLC and a local Atlanta phone number. He snatched his cell phone with trembling fingers and punched in the digits. The line clicked as the call was answered. "Hello, this is Terrence Davis calling. Regarding the demand letter I just received from Genesis Holdings," he said, his voice shaking with terror. I sat in Attorney Sterling's office, staring out the large window at the beautiful sprawling city I now essentially owned. I held my cell phone to my ear, listening to the pathetic, frantic desperation dripping from his voice. A cold, ruthless smile spread across my face. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds before delivering the final lethal blow. "Rent is due, Terrence." The line went completely dead. He sat paralyzed in his office chair, staring blankly at the dark screen of his phone as his entire world collapsed. The line went completely dead. He sat paralyzed in his office chair, staring blankly at the dark screen of his phone as his entire world collapsed. The realization that I was the phantom creditor holding the leash to his miserable life finally registered in his arrogant brain. Terrence immediately panicked. He frantically dialed his sister Jasmine and his brother-in-law DeAndre, screaming into the receiver that the anonymous holding company executing the hostile takeover was actually me. He told them about the phone call and the brutal demand letter. He told them that I was legally weaponizing his massive debt to seize everything he owned. The sheer terror in his voice must have been absolute music to the ears of anyone with a shred of decency, but to Jasmine it sounded like a declaration of war. Jasmine was a woman who thrived on toxic drama and cheap public spectacle. When she realized that I was systematically destroying her golden brother and his precious company, she completely lost her mind. She refused to accept that her family was entirely at fault. Instead of admitting defeat, she decided to play the only pathetic game she knew. She grabbed her smartphone and launched a vicious, unhinged smear campaign against me across every single social media platform available. Jasmine typed out a lengthy, venomous rant designed to assassinate my character in front of our mutual friends, our family members, and my local community. She branded me a bitter, barren woman who was completely consumed by toxic jealousy. She claimed that I was illegally using my newfound inheritance to aggressively harass her brother simply because I could not handle the fact that he had moved on to a younger, more beautiful woman. She explicitly mentioned Chloe and her pregnancy, painting the 26-year-old homewrecker as an innocent victim of my supposedly unhinged wrath. Jasmine posted terrible lies claiming I was deliberately trying to force a pregnant woman out onto the cold streets out of pure spite because my own womb was broken. She tagged my event planning business page. She tagged local Atlanta community groups. She urged everyone to boycott my corporate galas and labeled me a dangerous sociopath who needed immediate psychiatric intervention. Within hours, her malicious post had hundreds of shares and dozens of comments from eager gossips who loved feasting on a fresh, juicy suburban scandal. I sat comfortably on the plush velvet sofa in my penthouse suite, watching the social media storm erupt on my tablet. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages from concerned acquaintances and nosy former neighbors asking if the horrific rumors were actually true. A normal woman might have immediately jumped into the chaotic comment section to aggressively defend her honor. A lesser woman might have gone on a furious live stream to scream the absolute truth into the void and demand public vindication. But I am not a lesser woman. I am a wealthy, highly calculated strategist. Engaging in a loud, messy internet shouting match with a toxic clown like Jasmine was strictly peasant behavior. I absolutely refused to lower myself to her miserable level. Lions do not lose a single second of sleep over the loud, obnoxious opinions of desperate sheep. I closed the social media application and set my tablet down on the glass coffee table. If Jasmine wanted to play dirty, I was going to show her exactly how a true professional cleans house. She wanted to hit me with cheap internet lies. I was going to hit her with the crushing weight of the federal justice system. I walked over to the mahogany desk and opened my encrypted laptop. I pulled up the extensive digital file Attorney Sterling and I had meticulously compiled. I navigated straight to the specific folder labeled DeAndre. DeAndre was currently employed as a senior paralegal at one of the most prestigious, highly respected corporate law firms in downtown Atlanta. He carried his expensive leather briefcase and wore his tailored suits with an unearned sense of supreme arrogance. He genuinely believed that his deep inside knowledge of the legal system made him completely untouchable. He forgot that the law is a highly volatile weapon and it cuts both ways with absolute ruthless efficiency. I extracted the high-resolution scan of the sworn federal affidavit Terrence had eagerly filed at the courthouse just yesterday morning. The exact document where Terrence happily confessed in his own handwriting to deliberately intercepting certified mail and bypassing the official process server. I combined Terrence's legally binding confession with the forged return receipts that DeAndre had personally filed with the county clerk. I highlighted the official notary stamp that DeAndre had illegally used from his prestigious law firm to authorize the fraudulent paperwork. I compiled the time-stamped logs, the undeniable proof of his malicious coordination, and the explicit evidence of his direct involvement in a criminal conspiracy to defraud a citizen of her legal marital rights. The digital dossier I assembled was the absolute ultimate guillotine. It was clean, precise, and undeniably lethal. I drafted a pristine, highly professional email addressed directly to the powerful managing partner of DeAndre's prestigious law firm. I copied the official ethics committee of the State Bar Association and the local district attorney office, specializing in white-collar fraud. I attached the massive digital dossier. I clearly outlined that a senior paralegal operating under their respected corporate banner had illegally utilized their official notary stamp to commit grand mail fraud, forgery, and perjury in a federal family court proceeding. I did not add any emotional commentary. The cold, hard evidence spoke loudly enough. I clicked send and leaned back in my chair, taking a slow, deep breath. The fallout was beautifully instantaneous. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, DeAndre was sitting in his expensive glass-enclosed cubicle, happily drafting a mundane contract for a corporate client. He was likely dreaming about the lavish lifestyle he thought his family had secured. The heavy glass door to his department suddenly swung open. The senior managing partner of the firm marched into the room with a face like absolute thunder. He was flanked by two stern-looking corporate security guards and the firm's strict human resources director. The entire busy office floor went dead silent as the imposing group bypassed everyone and stopped directly in front of DeAndre's desk. DeAndre looked up, his arrogant smile faltering immediately when he saw the intense, unyielding fury burning in the managing partner's eyes. The partner did not mince his words. He slammed a printed copy of my digital dossier directly onto DeAndre's keyboard. He loudly informed DeAndre that he was immediately and permanently terminated for severe gross misconduct, ethical violations, and suspected criminal fraud. DeAndre felt the blood completely drain from his face. He stammered frantically, trying to formulate a pathetic excuse, but his voice failed him entirely. The HR director emotionlessly instructed him to hand over his corporate building pass, his company phone, and his official notary stamp. DeAndre's hands shook violently as he surrendered his items. He was publicly stripped of his professional badge of honor right in front of his whispering, staring colleagues. The security guards handed him a cheap cardboard box and ordered him to pack only his personal desktop items. He was not allowed to touch his computer. The sheer profound humiliation of being aggressively escorted out of the prestigious high-rise building by armed security was absolute torture for a man consumed by his own ego. The managing partner delivered one final crushing blow before the elevator doors closed. He informed DeAndre that the firm was fully cooperating with the state bar investigation and that the federal authorities would likely be contacting him regarding the mail fraud and forgery charges. DeAndre stumbled out onto the hot Atlanta pavement, clutching his pathetic cardboard box. His entire professional career was instantly incinerated. He was facing permanent blacklisting from the legal community and the very real terrifying prospect of serving hard time in a federal penitentiary. Panic seized his throat. He dropped his box onto the concrete, pulling out his personal cell phone with trembling fingers. He immediately dialed his wife, Jasmine. He screamed into the phone that he had just been fired, that the law firm knew everything about the divorce scam, and that he was going to prison. He blamed Jasmine for pushing Terrence to execute the hostile takeover. He blamed Terrence for being an incompetent fool who signed a written confession. The toxic family alliance was completely fracturing under the intense, crushing pressure of real-world consequences. Jasmine received the frantic, terrifying phone call while she was sitting in a local high-end nail salon, casually getting a fresh manicure. When DeAndre screamed that his career was destroyed and federal charges were imminent, she dropped her phone entirely. The reality of the situation crashed into her with the force of a runaway freight train. Her wealthy, protective bubble had just violently popped. Her brother's logistics company was facing imminent hostile seizure. Her husband's lucrative career was completely eradicated. The massive $50 million fortune was entirely out of reach. The lavish, unearned lifestyle she felt completely entitled to had just been aggressively ripped from her greedy, manicured hands. And she knew exactly who was pulling the heavy execution levers. She did not feel remorse. She did not feel regret. She felt an explosive, blinding, unhinged rage. Jasmine stormed out of the salon, leaving her luxury treatment unfinished. She climbed into her SUV and slammed her foot down onto the accelerator. She was completely consumed by toxic, furious madness. She ignored every single speed limit racing through the busy Atlanta streets, like a woman possessed by pure vengeance. She drove straight to the sleek, modern commercial building where I housed my elite event planning agency. She did not care about optics anymore. She did not care about her precious social standing or her public reputation. She wanted blood. She wanted to physically drag me down to her miserable, violent level. She parked her vehicle illegally in a handicap spot directly in front of the main glass doors. Jasmine bypassed the heavy security desk in the main lobby, aggressively pushing her way past a protesting receptionist. She stormed down the plush, carpeted hallway, her high heels clicking loudly like rapid gunfire. She reached the heavy frosted glass door of my personal executive office and did not even bother to knock. She kicked the door violently, causing it to slam open and bounce hard against the wall stopper. Jasmine stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, her eyes wide and completely deranged. Her hair was disheveled and her designer blouse was wrinkled from her erratic driving. "You evil, vindictive woman!" Jasmine screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated hatred. You destroyed my husband. You ruined my brother. You think you can just sit here and tear my entire family apart? I am going to rip your face off." She clenched her hands into tight, trembling fists and took a highly aggressive, threatening step forward, preparing to physically attack me in my own corporate sanctuary. I sat perfectly still behind my large, polished mahogany desk, entirely unbothered by her chaotic entrance. I did not flinch. I did not stand up. I simply looked her dead in the eye and casually pressed a small, discreet silver button hidden just beneath the edge of my desktop. Before Jasmine could take another violent step forward, two massive, heavily armed private security guards stepped smoothly out of the shadows of the adjacent private corridor, blocking her path completely. The two massive security guards stood like impenetrable, solid brick walls between me and the unhinged woman screaming in my doorway. Jasmine thrashed and clawed violently against their iron grips, but her pathetic flailing was completely useless against professionals. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my polished mahogany desk, and steepled my fingers together. I looked her directly in her bloodshot, manic eyes. "Escort this trespassing liability out of my building right now," I instructed the guards, my voice radiating calm. "If she resists or tries to return, you have my full authorization to press assault charges and have her locked inside a county holding cell for the night." Jasmine screamed vulgar curses, struggling wildly, as my security team dragged her backward down the plush, carpeted hallway. Her shrill voice echoed through the corridors until the heavy steel elevator doors finally swallowed her existence. I sat alone in the perfect quiet of my executive office, taking a slow sip of my green tea. The best part of this warfare was that I did not even have to lift another finger. I had successfully lit the fuse. Now I just had to sit back and watch the fireworks destroy their reality. Across town, inside the stolen suburban house I had paid for the atmosphere, was rapidly devolving into madness. Terrence was sitting at the marble kitchen island, desperately refreshing his laptop screen with trembling fingers. Every single bank account tied to his logistics startup displayed a terrifying negative balance. Genesis Holdings LLC had successfully executed the seizure and frozen all his assets, rendering him completely broke. The realization that he was entirely destitute washed over him like a bucket of ice water. He stared at the red numbers on the screen, knowing that his fake corporate empire had just been legally vaporized. He could not even buy a tank of gas, much less pay his legal team to fix his blunder. He chugged a glass of cheap whiskey, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he swallowed the bitter liquid. The front door suddenly burst open, hitting the wall with a crack. DeAndre stormed into the foyer looking like a hunted fugitive. His tailored suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, his silk tie was missing, and his eyes were wide with sheer panic. "You ruined my life!" DeAndre roared, marching straight into the kitchen and slapping his hands down onto the island. "The State Bar investigator just called my cell phone. Terrence, they have your sworn affidavit. They have the forged return receipts. I am facing 5 to 10 years in a penitentiary because of your stupidity." Terrence slammed his whiskey glass down onto the granite countertop hard enough to crack the thick glass base. "My stupidity," Terrence yelled, stepping up to DeAndre with his chest puffed out. "You were the paralegal genius who promised me this was a foolproof plan. You told me the default judgment was a slam dunk. You forged the signatures, DeAndre. You used your notary stamp on the documents. I just signed where you told me to sign." DeAndre shoved Terrence hard against the refrigerator. "You signed a written confession, you idiot," DeAndre screamed. "You marched into a federal courthouse and admitted to a criminal conspiracy because you were too greedy to consult me first. You thought you could reverse a divorce and claim a $50 million inheritance. You traded my entire career and my freedom for your vanity." Terrence lunged forward, blinded by rage. He threw a right hook that connected with DeAndre's jaw. DeAndre stumbled backward, crashing into the bar stools and sending them clattering to the hardwood floor. DeAndre recovered, wiping a smear of blood from his split lip. He let out a feral roar and charged at Terrence, tackling him to the ground. The two grown men wrestled on the kitchen floor, destroying everything in their path. They smashed into the custom cabinetry, shattering expensive plates and toppling crystal vases I had personally imported from Italy. It was a brutal fistfight fueled by cowardice and absolute betrayal. They punched and clawed at each other with ruthless aggression. Each man was trying to beat the guilt and the prison sentences out of the other. The illusion of their sophisticated wealthy brotherhood was entirely eradicated. "Stop it!" Chloe shrieked, appearing suddenly in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing my old silk bathrobe, clutching her pregnant stomach and looking terrified by the bloody brawl unfolding in the center of the room. "Stop fighting, both of you. You are scaring me and the baby." The intense physical exertion, the smashing glass, and the terror of the situation triggered a severe panic attack. Chloe gasped loudly, clutching her chest as her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed against the doorframe, hyperventilating rapidly and struggling to pull oxygen into her lungs. She let out a sharp cry, holding her swollen belly. DeAndre immediately froze mid-punch. He shoved Terrence off his chest and scrambled frantically across the broken glass scattered across the kitchen floor. He rushed directly to Chloe, dropping to his knees beside her. DeAndre wrapped his arms around her with an astonishing, intensely intimate level of urgent protective concern. He pulled her tightly against his chest, stroking her hair and whispering frantically into her ear. "Breathe, baby, please, just breathe." DeAndre pleaded, his voice thick with raw terror and undeniable devotion. "Please do not stress the baby. I am right here. I got you. Our little boy is going to be completely fine. Just look at me, Chloe. Look at me." Terrence pushed himself up off the floor, wiping a stream of blood from his bruised nose. He froze, entirely paralyzed by the bizarre, highly intimate scene unfolding directly in front of him. His brother-in-law was holding his pregnant mistress with the fierce protective energy of a devoted, expecting father. He called her baby. He called the unborn child our little boy. The heavy, sinister realization slammed into Terrence's arrogant brain like a steel wrecking ball. Terrence spotted Chloe's unlocked smartphone resting face up on the entryway console table where she had carelessly dropped it during her panic attack. He lunged for the device, completely ignoring Chloe's sudden panicked protests. Terrence rapidly opened her text messages and clicked directly on the pinned thread bearing DeAndre's name. Terrence scrolled through months of explicit, undeniably intimate conversations. The digital evidence was absolutely staggering and undeniable. There were thousands of late-night texts, secret hotel room bookings, and romantic confessions. DeAndre had been sleeping with Chloe behind Jasmine's back for over 14 months. The timeline of their secret affair overlapped perfectly with Chloe's pregnancy. Terrence read the most recent message sent just 3 days ago. Chloe had texted a picture of her ultrasound with the caption, "He kicks, just like his daddy." DeAndre had responded, "I cannot wait to hold my son. We will take Terrence for everything he has and start our real family." The smartphone slipped from Terrence's bloody, trembling fingers and clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. He stared at DeAndre and Chloe with wide, unblinking eyes, his breathing shallow and rapid. "The baby is not mine," Terrence whispered, his voice completely hollow, breaking under the crushing weight of the ultimate betrayal. He felt his entire reality shatter into a million jagged pieces. "You have been sleeping with my assistant. You got her pregnant in my own bed." DeAndre stood up slowly, carefully shielding a weeping Chloe behind his broad shoulders. His face was a mask of cold, unapologetic defiance. "You are a broke, pathetic loser, Terrence," DeAndre sneered, spitting blood onto the floor. "You have absolutely nothing left to offer her. Chloe deserves a real man with a real future, not a fake CEO who leeches off his successful wife." At that exact moment, the front door of the house swung open. Jasmine walked slowly into the foyer. Her designer clothes were completely disheveled. Her hair was a messy, chaotic rat nest from her humiliating physical removal from my office building, and her expensive makeup was heavily smeared with angry black tears. She stood absolutely frozen in the entryway, staring in sheer horror at the shattered kitchen, the bloody, injured men, and Chloe cowering behind her own husband. The silence in the destroyed house was absolutely deafening. Jasmine had just lost her brother's stolen fortune, her fake social standing, and her unearned dignity. Now she was staring directly at the undeniable living proof that her husband had deeply betrayed her with the very same young mistress she had proudly paraded around town to spite me. She let out a guttural, devastating scream that pierced through the remaining tension in the room. The toxic family had officially and violently turned on each other, tearing their own miserable, pathetic lives apart piece by bloody piece, without me ever having to lift a single perfectly manicured finger. 2 weeks later, the crisp morning sun broke over the Atlanta skyline. Today was the official federal hearing for Terrence and his incredibly desperate motion to set aside the default judgment. I woke up in my luxurious penthouse suite, feeling completely refreshed and utterly invincible. Today was an execution, and one must always dress appropriately for a funeral. I bypassed the standard conservative court attire entirely. I selected a custom-tailored razor-sharp ivory power suit with a plunging neckline and wide leg trousers. I paired it with 6-inch emerald green designer stilettos that perfectly matched the massive cut diamond resting heavily on my right hand. My hair was styled in a flawless, sleek bob that commanded absolute authority in any room. I applied a bold matte red lipstick, serving as a vibrant warning sign to anyone foolish enough to cross my path. I looked radiant, wealthy, and utterly untouchable. I was not just walking into a courtroom. I was walking onto a violent battlefield to formally claim my empire and permanently bury my enemy. I rode in the back of a chauffeured black Maybach, sipping a fresh espresso while reviewing the final legal strategy with attorney Sterling over a secure video call. Sterling was already waiting for me at the courthouse, holding a pristine leather briefcase that contained the destruction of Terrence Jamal Davis. As my driver pulled to the front steps of the federal courthouse, I adjusted my dark sunglasses. A small swarm of local business reporters had gathered near the entrance, tipped off by my strategic leaks to Julian Pierce. I ignored their flashing cameras and questions, striding up the concrete steps with the effortless grace of a conquering queen. Inside the marble hallway of the courthouse, the atmosphere was heavy with tense legal energy. I spotted Terrence immediately. The sight of him was almost pitiful enough to warrant a genuine laugh. The man who had thrown a $5,000 check at my feet just a few short weeks ago was completely unrecognizable. He looked abhorrent and destroyed. His face was deeply bruised and swollen, a colorful testament to the brutal fistfight he had lost against DeAndre. His eyes were sunken hollow and lined with dark, heavy bags of sleep deprivation. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it had been violently pulled from the bottom of a thrift store discount bin. His shirt collar was visibly frayed, and his ugly striped tie was completely crooked. His posture was totally defeated. His shoulders slumped terribly forward under the crushing immense weight of his total financial ruin and sheer personal humiliation. The toxic fallout with Chloe and his treacherous family had clearly broken him down to his deepest molecular core. He was a shattered, hollow, pathetic shell of the arrogant, narcissistic CEO who once proudly thought he owned the entire world. Standing next to him was his new legal representation. Because I had successfully frozen one of his business and personal bank accounts through Genesis Holdings, LLC, Terrence could not afford a high-powered attorney. He had been forced to hire a bottom-tier discount lawyer who looked like he operated out of a damp, miserable strip mall basement. The sad lawyer was sweating profusely, nervously, clutching a frayed manila folder, and looking completely overwhelmed and entirely out of his depth. Terrence glanced up and caught sight of me walking down the long, bright corridor. His bloodshot eyes widened in absolute shock and deep, profound regret. He took a hesitant, desperate, weak step toward me, opening his badly bruised mouth to speak, but my massive private security detail smoothly blocked his path. I did not even break my confident, measured stride. I looked straight past him, as if he were a completely invisible piece of rotting trash resting on the polished marble floor. I walked directly through the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4, taking my seat at the highly polished plaintiff table right next to the brilliant, incredibly prepared attorney Sterling. The large courtroom was entirely silent, save for the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the wooden wall clock. The Honorable Judge Marcus, presiding over the busy family court docket, entered the room with a stern, intimidating, commanding presence. We all rose respectfully. The judge took his elevated seat, adjusted his reading glasses, and looked down at the massive, intimidating stack of legal files resting squarely on his wooden bench. He did not look particularly pleased. Terrence and his sweating discount lawyer quickly took their seats at the opposing defense table. Terence kept darting desperate, pathetic, hopeful glances in my direction, truly hoping to catch a single tiny glimmer of the devoted, loving, submissive wife he had so casually and maliciously discarded. I kept my gaze fixed coldly forward, radiating pure, unbothered, absolute excellence. Counsel, the judge said, his deep, rich voice echoing loudly through the large, quiet courtroom. I have thoroughly reviewed the plaintiff motion to set aside the default judgment of divorce in the matter of Williams versus Davis. This is a highly unusual, unprecedented request, given that the legal judgment was finalized well over a month ago by this very court. I am ready to hear your opening arguments regarding exactly why this binding legal decree should be reversed today. Terence nudged his lawyer, who stood up and cleared his throat nervously. Your Honor. The lawyer began, his voice shaking under the scrutiny of the judge. My client, Mr. Davis, requests that the court set aside the default judgment due to a misunderstanding. My client loves his wife. He contends that the original divorce filing was a mistake fueled by financial stress related to business operations. He never intended to dissolve this marriage. Furthermore, we argue that the default judgment was pushed through without reconciliation efforts on either side. My client maintains that both parties want to fix their broken family and restore their marital bond. We ask the court to show leniency, reverse the divorce decree, and allow this couple the opportunity to seek counseling and heal their relationship. The delusion of the argument was staggering to witness. Terence sat nodding vigorously, trying to look like a heartbroken husband who had lost his way in the dark. He believed his lawyer could spin a fairy tale of true love and temporary insanity to mask his fraud. He thought the judge would buy the narrative of a stressed-out businessman who just needed a second chance at love. He was banking his entire future on my weakness, assuming I would play along and accept him back to avoid public embarrassment. He was unaware of the guillotine hovering inches above his neck. The judge carefully listened to the opening statement with a completely blank expression. He slowly lowered his glasses and turned his gaze directly toward my defense table. The silence in the large room amplified the tension. And what exactly is the official position of the defense? The judge asked, addressing my calm, confident legal team. Does the former wife actually share this sudden, passionate, desperate desire for marital reconciliation and healing? I sat perfectly still, my posture impeccable, my beautiful expression carved from solid, unyielding frozen ice. I did not even blink. I let the dense silence hang for a few long, dramatic, agonizing seconds, purposely allowing Terence to severely sweat under the intense, crushing, immense pressure. I could clearly hear his rapid, shallow, panicked, erratic breathing loudly echoing from across the wide center aisle. This was the exact, precise, monumental moment he foolishly thought I would finally cave. This was the moment he expected the old, exhausted Nia to resurface and instantly save him from his selfish choices. He desperately wanted me to be the stepping stone he could easily walk over to magically reach his $50 million salvation. I slowly turned my head and looked Terence straight in his desperate, bloodshot eyes. I let a cold, lethal smile touch the corners of my red lips. I gave him a subtle, slow shake of my head. The remaining color instantly drained from his bruised face. The terrifying realization that he was walking straight into a meticulously planned legal ambush finally hit his arrogant brain. He was already strapped far too tightly into the execution chair to escape. I turned my attention smoothly back to the front of the pristine courtroom, sitting incredibly tall in my ivory power suit, ready to watch the spectacular legal slaughter rapidly unfold. Attorney Sterling calmly stood up from his leather chair. He picked up a thick black folder from our polished table. Sterling looked directly at the judge with unwavering, absolute confidence. Your Honor, my client has no intention of ever reconciling. Sterling said, his voice booming with crystal-clear authority. In fact, we are here today to present incontrovertible evidence of grand perjury, massive procedural fraud, and a formal motion to permanently uphold the divorce while referring the plaintiff for immediate criminal prosecution. In fact, we are here today to present incontrovertible evidence of grand perjury, massive procedural fraud, and a formal motion to permanently uphold the divorce while referring the plaintiff for immediate criminal prosecution. The entire courtroom inhaled a collective sharp breath. Terrence physically recoiled as if Attorney Sterling had just struck him across his badly bruised face with a solid steel baseball bat. The cheap discount lawyer sitting next to Terrence suddenly looked like he wanted the polished hardwood floor to open up and swallow him entirely whole. Judge Marcus slammed his heavy wooden gavel down violently, silencing the frantic murmuring erupting from the crowded gallery. He turned his piercing, intimidating gaze toward our table, extending his hand. "Let me see this supposed evidence, counselor," the judge demanded, his voice rumbling with absolute, unquestionable authority. Sterling walked smoothly to the high bench, handing over a thick, pristine black binder. Inside was the exact sworn affidavit Terrence had eagerly filed just a few days prior, alongside the forged return receipts and the meticulous timeline of his mail interception scheme. Judge Marcus put on his reading glasses and opened the heavy binder. The courtroom was so incredibly silent I could clearly hear the low, steady hum of the air conditioning unit. I watched the judge carefully scan the very first page. His thick gray eyebrows shot up toward his hairline in sheer absolute disbelief. He flipped to the second page, his expression rapidly darkening from professional curiosity to absolute unyielding pure fury. He looked down at Terrence, who was currently sinking so low into his wooden chair he practically disappeared from view. Mr. Davis, the judge, began, his voice dangerously quiet and laced with lethal venom. "You submitted a sworn affidavit to this federal court stating that you deliberately concealed divorce proceedings from your legal wife. You wrote in your own handwriting that you intentionally intercepted certified legal documents from the United States Postal Service. You proudly admitted to utilizing a paralegal to forge official return receipts to unlawfully secure a default judgment. Are you completely out of your mind or simply the most arrogant criminal to ever step foot inside my courtroom?" Terrence opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked exactly like a pathetic fish suffocating on dry land. His discount lawyer hastily stood up, waving his sweaty hands nervously. "Your Honor, my client was under immense psychological duress when he wrote that statement. We ask that it be stricken from the official record immediately." Judge Marcus slammed his fist onto the heavy wooden bench, making the cheap lawyer flinch violently. "Sit down right now, counselor," the judge roared. "Your client signed a sworn declaration under penalty of federal perjury. He proudly confessed to manipulating the judicial system to steal assets from his wife." Attorney Sterling did not let the aggressive momentum die. He stood up again, holding a second detailed folder. "Your Honor, if I may add essential context to the plaintiff and his motive," Sterling said smoothly. "Mr. Davis did not just manipulate the court. He engaged in severe long-term financial abuse. We have submitted verified bank records proving he systematically siphoned his wife's salary to fund an extramarital affair with his former assistant. He filed the fraudulent divorce specifically to strip my client of her residential property before his failing logistics company collapsed under toxic predatory debt." The judge aggressively flipped through the financial records Sterling provided. The undeniable proof of the stolen money, the luxury hotel bookings, and the expensive designer handbags bought with my blood and sweat were laid completely bare. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhaling a long, heavy breath of sheer, unadulterated disgust. He looked at Terrence with a gaze so filled with intense contempt it could have easily frozen boiling water. "Terrence Jamal Davis," the judge stated, his voice ringing with absolute terrifying finality. "You came into this courtroom expecting to use the law as a cheap tool to further your own greedy, malicious agenda. You thought you could miraculously reverse a binding legal decree simply because you realized you missed out on a much larger financial payout. The sheer audacity you possess is frankly staggering. I am officially denying your motion to set aside the default judgment," the judge declared, striking his gavel loudly. "The divorce remains absolute and final. Ms. Williams retains 100% of her individual assets, including any recent massive inheritances. Furthermore, I am holding you in direct civil contempt of court for your blatant, arrogant abuse of the judicial process. I am officially forwarding your sworn affidavit and these forged documents directly to the district attorney office with a strong, urgent recommendation for your immediate criminal prosecution for perjury and federal mail fraud. You are dismissed." Terrence let out a loud, guttural, devastating sob. He buried his bruised face in his trembling hands, crying hysterically as the massive, crushing weight of his permanent destruction broke his arrogant soul. His cheap lawyer quickly packed his frayed briefcase and practically sprinted down the center aisle, desperate to distance himself from the radioactive legal fallout. The armed bailiff stepped forward, instructing Terrence to gather his things and vacate the premises immediately. I stood up calmly, smoothing the pristine fabric of my ivory power suit. I thanked Attorney Sterling for his brilliant, flawless execution and walked out of the courtroom, my emerald green stilettos clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I felt completely, entirely liberated. I stepped out into the warm, bright Atlanta sunlight, taking a deep, cleansing breath of fresh air. The heavy, oppressive chains I had carried for 7 long, miserable years were finally broken forever. But my business with Terrence was not entirely finished just yet. I stood near the top of the grand concrete courthouse steps, flanked by my massive private security detail waiting patiently. A few minutes later, Terrence stumbled blindly out through the heavy glass doors. He looked completely disoriented, stumbling heavily like a man who had just survived a brutal, horrific car crash, only to realize he was still trapped inside the burning wreckage. He saw me standing there looking like an untouchable, wealthy queen. He dragged his feet across the concrete, walking toward me with thick, hot tears streaming down his swollen, badly bruised face. "Nia," he whimpered, his voice cracking pathetically in the humid air. "Please, Nia. I am going to jail. I have absolutely nothing left in this world. You have to help me. I am begging you." I reached into my expensive designer handbag and pulled out a sleek black folder. I held it out firmly toward him. "I am not here to help you, Terrence," I said, my voice completely devoid of any human sympathy. "I am here to deliver your final eviction notice." Terrence took the black folder with violently shaking hands. He slowly opened it and stared down at the crisp, legal documents resting inside. The first page was the official corporate seizure notice from Genesis Holdings, LLC. He read the registered ownership details. He looked up at me, his bloodshot eyes widening in absolute, sheer, unadulterated horror as the final devastating piece of the massive puzzle clicked into place. "You," he gasped, taking a weak, staggering step backward. "You are the commercial lender. You bought my corporate debt." "Yes, I am," I replied, a cold, lethal, triumphant smile spreading across my red lips. "You missed your payment, Terrence. Your logistics company is officially completely mine. I already fired your remaining useless staff and liquidated your cheap office furniture early this morning. The business servers are shut down. The proprietary software now belongs entirely to me. You are completely locked out of the building forever." Terrence let out a choked, agonizing gasp, clutching his chest, as if he were having a massive physical heart attack. He flipped frantically to the second document in the black folder. It was a formal 3-day eviction notice for the beautiful suburban house he had maliciously stolen from me. "I bought the house back from the bank, Terrence," I explained, watching his pathetic soul shatter into microscopic pieces. "Since you defaulted on the massive mortgage payments you were supposed to be making, I swooped in and paid it off entirely in cash. I am the sole legal owner of that property again. You and your pregnant, treacherous mistress have exactly 72 hours to pack your cheap garbage bags and vacate my premises completely. If you leave a single tiny scratch on my hardwood floors, I will have you arrested for criminal vandalism." Terrence collapsed completely. His weak knees buckled, hitting the hard concrete steps of the federal courthouse with a sickening loud thud. He openly wailed, sobbing uncontrollably in front of the passing lawyers, the armed security guards, and the local business reporters gathering near the busy street. He dropped the black folder, letting the legal documents scatter wildly across the dirty ground. "Nia, please!" he begged, crawling forward on his hands and knees. He reached out desperately, trying to grab the hem of my tailored trousers, but my lead security guard smoothly stepped forward and kicked his hand violently away. "Do not do this to me, Nia," Terrence cried, wiping thick streams of snot and tears from his ruined face. "I am your husband. I loved you. I am sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I will do anything. I will clean your floors. I will work for you. Please do not leave me out here to die." I looked down at the miserable, broken, pathetic excuse for a man groveling pathetically at my expensive green stilettos. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no sadness, no lingering affection whatsoever. The desperate, weeping man crying on the concrete was a stranger, a toxic, parasitic leech I had finally successfully extracted from my vibrant, healthy, wealthy life. I reached up and gracefully slid my dark designer sunglasses over my eyes, shielding myself from his pathetic, blinding desperation. I tilted my head, looking down at him from my high, elevated pedestal. I told you a month ago, Terrence, I said, my voice carrying clearly over his loud, wretched sobbing. You signed your own death warrant. Now lie in the grave. I turned my back on him without a single ounce of hesitation. I walked smoothly down the grand concrete steps, my security team parting the small crowd of shocked onlookers. A sleek, black chauffeured Maybach glided to a smooth, perfect stop right at the curb. The driver quickly stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leatherback seat, adjusting my ivory suit jacket. As the driver closed the door, I looked out the tinted window. Terrence was still sitting on the hard, unforgiving concrete, surrounded by his scattered eviction notices, weeping openly as his entire fake empire burned to the ground. The Maybach pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the busy Atlanta traffic, carrying me straight toward my brilliant golden future. How does this conclusion to the showdown feel for your AI narration setup? I can refine the final sections if you are ready to wrap up Nia's victory. The weeks that followed my glorious courthouse victory were an absolute masterclass in karmic retribution. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy the rest of Terrence Jamal Davis and his miserable life. The federal justice system and his own towering incompetence did all the heavy lifting for me. The absolute ruin of my former husband was swift, brutal, and incredibly satisfying to observe from the comfort of my luxury penthouse. Within 10 days of his pathetic courthouse meltdown, Terrence was officially forced to file for personal bankruptcy. I received a highly entertaining report from my private security team detailing the exact moment the repo men arrived at the cheap motel where Terrence was currently residing. The repo men did not care about his former executive status. They hooked his flashy vehicle to the back of a tow truck in broad daylight, while Terrence stood in the motel parking lot wearing stained sweatpants, begging them to give him one more week. He lost his car, his fake company, and his entirely fabricated reputation, all in one devastating swoop. He was reduced to eating cheap microwave noodles alone in a damp motel room, constantly looking over his shoulder for federal agents. The glorious implosion of his toxic family was equally spectacular to witness. Jasmine, the loud, obnoxious sister who loved bragging about her perfect, wealthy lifestyle, was subjected to the ultimate public humiliation. The explosive revelation of DeAndre and Chloe having a secret affair completely shattered her fragile, fake reality. Jasmine immediately filed for a highly public, incredibly messy divorce. Her former friends and country club associates mercilessly mocked her, pointing out the hilarious irony that the woman who helped plot the destruction of my marriage had her own husband stolen by a 26-year-old former assistant. Jasmine was forced to sell her expensive suburban home and move into a cramped apartment completely stripped of her unearned social status. DeAndre suffered an even worse fate. The State Bar Association did not take lightly to a senior paralegal utilizing a prestigious law firm notary stamp to commit federal family court fraud. The Ethics Committee swiftly and permanently revoked his paralegal license, barring him from ever working in the legal field again. The criminal investigation officially destroyed his professional future. To avoid immediate prison time and to pay the mountain of legal fees he acquired, DeAndre was forced to accept a grueling minimum wage job working the night shift at a massive discount retail store. The court also ordered him to pay substantial monthly child support for the baby he conceived with Chloe, ensuring he would remain completely broke for the next 18 years. And then there was Chloe, the naive, opportunistic homewrecker who thought she had successfully secured a wealthy sugar daddy ended up with absolutely nothing. When the dust finally settled, neither Terrence nor DeAndre wanted anything to do with her. Terrence despised her for carrying another man's child, and DeAndre resented her for destroying his marriage and his lucrative career. Chloe was left entirely alone, struggling to navigate life as a single mother in a tiny rundown apartment she could barely afford. She gambled her entire future on a toxic mirage and lost spectacularly. The pathetic reality of raising a child that neither father wanted to claim was her permanent punishment. While the vultures who tried to pick my bones clean were busy fighting over scraps in the gutter, I was busy ascending to my rightful throne. I officially took full command of my $50 million real estate empire, seamlessly merging my sharp corporate event planning expertise with my newfound massive commercial resources. I did not just want to be a wealthy landlord. I wanted to actively reshape the skyline of the city that had witnessed my glorious rebirth. The crown jewel of my inheritance was the magnificent glass and steel commercial high-rise located squarely in the heart of downtown Atlanta, the very same building where Terrence had foolishly leased his corporate headquarters using my stolen salary. On a crisp, beautiful Tuesday morning, I hosted an exclusive ribbon-cutting ceremony directly in front of the massive building. The event was flawlessly executed and attended by the elite movers and shakers of the Atlanta business world, including Julian Pierce, the journalist who had enthusiastically helped me set the initial trap. I wore a stunning, vibrant, magenta-tailored suit that commanded the attention of every single camera lens in the plaza. The morning sun gleamed off the massive cut diamond resting on my right hand. The most satisfying moment of the entire morning was not the applause or the flashing cameras. It was the moment I gave the signal to my construction crew hanging high above the street. With a loud mechanical whir, the enormous cranes slowly lowered the cheap, tacky logo of Terrence's defunct logistics startup from the side of the building. The crowd watched as the physical symbol of his fake empire was unceremoniously dropped into a massive industrial dumpster waiting on the curb. In its place, the crew hoisted a breathtaking, massive illuminated sign bearing the sleek modern branding of my own corporate event management firm alongside the crest of my new real estate holding company. My name was now permanently etched into the skyline, shining brightly for the entire city to see. I had literally erased him from the corporate map and replaced his failure with my absolute triumph. I stood on the pristine concrete plaza, holding the oversized golden scissors, and smiled for the press. I was not the exhausted, overworked wife crying over unpaid bills anymore. I was a titan of industry, a woman who had walked through the fiery pits of ultimate betrayal and emerged completely unscathed, forged into solid, unbreakable diamonds. The reporters shouted questions asking about my incredible rapid ascent and future business plans, but I offered only polite professional smiles and elegant brief answers. I let my staggering success speak entirely for itself. The ribbon was cut, the applause thundered, and the elegant morning reception concluded perfectly. But the day was far from over. Tonight was the true celebration. I turned away from the cheering crowd and walked gracefully toward the grand towering glass doors of my newly branded high-rise. The heavy doors slid open, welcoming the sole owner of the empire. I stepped into the sprawling, opulent lobby, taking in the stunning imported marble floors, the cascading modern chandeliers, and the elite security team standing at attention waiting for my command. I walked past the frantic workers inspecting every single detail with the practiced critical eye of a seasoned event director. The towering floral arrangements consisting of thousands of rare white orchids and deep red roses were being perfectly positioned on the mirror-polished tables. The custom-built champagne towers were being constructed by master sommeliers flown in specifically for this exact occasion. The lighting technicians were adjusting the warm ambient glow to highlight the magnificent architecture of the building I now proudly owned. Every single element of the decor was a bold, unapologetic statement of wealth resilience and absolute flawless execution. This was not just a simple corporate networking event. This was a grand, majestic coronation. I was preparing to host the biggest, most exclusive charity gala the city of Atlanta had ever witnessed. It was an event entirely funded by my new massive empire designed specifically to honor and empower independent women who had survived financial abuse and domestic betrayal. I was utilizing my vast resources to ensure that no other woman in my community would ever have to feel trapped, scared, or financially dependent on a toxic, manipulative partner ever again. I walked toward the private express elevator leading directly to my new sprawling corner executive suite. I pressed the golden button and watched the metallic doors slide open, revealing the plush interior. I stepped inside and turned around, looking out over the busy lobby floor one last time before the doors closed. The frantic energy of the preparation, the sheer magnitude of the wealth, the absolute freedom of my new reality all washed over me in a glorious, warm wave of pure satisfaction. My phone buzzed quietly in my designer handbag. It was a message from Attorney Sterling confirming that the final legal roadblocks regarding the trust had been officially cleared. The elevator began its rapid, smooth ascent, carrying me higher above the city streets. I watched the floor numbers tick upward on the digital display, moving far away from the dirt, the deception, and the miserable, pathetic people who had tried to bury me alive. They thought they could dig a shallow grave for my ambitions, but they had no idea they were simply planting a seed that would grow into an unshakable fortress. I stepped out of the elevator and walked down the quiet, plush, carpeted hallway toward my executive office. I placed my hand on the cool metal door handle, taking a deep, centering breath. The battle was officially over, and the total, absolute victory was mine. I pushed the heavy door open and walked inside, preparing for the night that would cement my legacy forever. 1,000 words. I pushed the heavy door open and walked inside, preparing for the night that would cement my legacy forever. The penthouse venue was transformed into a breathtaking sanctuary of elegance and power. The towering ceilings were draped in cascading emerald silks that perfectly matched the custom designer gown I wore tonight. The panoramic glass walls offered a flawless, unobstructed view of the glittering Atlanta skyline, a sprawling city I now held firmly in the palm of my hand. The ambient lighting cast a radiant, warm gold glow over the massive crowd that had already gathered. This room was not filled with the superficial social climbers my former in-laws desperately tried to impress. This room was a curated masterpiece of true influence and absolute wealth. I looked out over these brilliant faces. The venue was absolutely packed with powerful, independent Black women. There were fierce corporate attorneys who shattered heavy glass ceilings every single day of their lives. There were brilliant tech entrepreneurs who built massive digital platforms from their small kitchen tables. There were respected community leaders, fierce advocates, and self-made millionaires who understood the exact steep price of relentless ambition. Every single woman in this massive room radiated an intoxicating blend of supreme intelligence, deep resilience, and unapologetic excellence. I walked gracefully through the crowded floor, exchanging warm, genuine smiles and firm professional handshakes. The vibrant energy vibrating through the entire penthouse was not just celebratory. It was profoundly electric and deeply empowering. I made my way towards the elevated stage located near the center of the massive room. Tonight was not merely a superficial celebration of my newly acquired corporate empire. It was the highly anticipated official launch of the Phoenix Initiative. I had personally endowed the charitable foundation with an initial $10 million grant, utilizing a significant liquid portion of my massive inheritance. The explicit, undeniable purpose of the initiative was to provide immediate, substantial financial resources, elite legal representation, and secure housing for women desperately trying to escape financial abuse and domestic manipulation. I knew exactly what it felt like to be bled completely dry by a toxic parasite. I was fiercely ensuring that no woman in my thriving city would ever have to painfully choose between her personal physical safety and her basic financial survival. I reached the bottom steps of the grand stage, and Julian Pierce gave me an encouraging, respectful nod from the front row. He had his digital recorder ready, knowing this specific speech would heavily headline his morning business column across the entire state. I stepped up to the clear acrylic podium, smoothly adjusting the sleek microphone with a calm, practiced ease. The gentle hum of elite conversation instantly ceased, echoing across the floor. Hundreds of eager eyes turned directly toward me, reflecting absolute respect and eager anticipation. I looked out over the magnificent crowd, taking a slow, deep breath of the fragrant floral air. The long, arduous journey to this exact pivotal moment had been painfully forged in the blazing hot fires of ultimate betrayal, but standing here tonight, I felt nothing but cool, refreshing, absolute clarity. Thank you all for gathering here in this beautiful space tonight. I began, my voice projecting with smooth, unwavering authority across the silent room. We are constantly surrounded by women who have built incredible, undeniable legacies. Women who have faced insurmountable odds and chosen to conquer them rather than surrender to the pressure. But I know that many of us standing in this luxurious room have also known the sharp, suffocating pain of having our brilliant light deliberately dimmed. We have poured our boundless energy, our fierce loyalty, and our hard-earned resources into people who only saw us as convenient stepping stones to further their own mediocre, selfish agendas. I paused deliberately, letting the heavy weight of my spoken words resonate deeply within the captivated audience. I saw numerous successful women nodding slowly, their bright eyes reflecting their own private fierce battles and hard-won victorious survival stories. Sometimes we blindly grip onto toxic situations and broken relationships because we are completely terrified of the vast empty space they will leave behind. I continued, my tone shifting into a sharp, resonant register. We foolishly mistake painful longevity for actual loyalty. We mistake deep chronic exhaustion for actively building a secure future. But I am standing right here tonight to clearly tell you that losing what you falsely thought was true love is not a tragedy. It is an aggressive divine intervention. Sometimes the universe has to violently clear the heavy debris from your path so you can finally step into your true, boundless destiny. I gripped the polished edges of the podium, leaning forward slightly. My sharp gaze swept across the massive room, locking onto the beautiful faces of the brilliant women who understood exactly what it meant to aggressively rise from the ashes. You are not a free rehabilitation center for broken, insecure people, I stated firmly, my strong voice echoing with powerful supreme conviction. Your ultimate value is not determined by how much deep pain you can silently endure simply to make someone else feel comfortable in their absolute mediocrity. Do not ever shrink yourself to fit into a room that is entirely too small for your grand ambition. If they cannot handle the sheer staggering magnitude of your bright light, let them put on sunglasses or let them walk away entirely. The entire massive room instantly erupted into a completely deafening, thunderous standing ovation. I smiled a genuinely breathtaking smile, stepping gracefully off the grand stage to graciously accept a perfectly chilled crystal flute of the absolute finest vintage champagne available tonight. I slowly turned my back to the cheering room, looking out peacefully over the glittering, illuminated Atlanta skyline. Have you ever had the trash take itself out only to find gold underneath the bin? Share your story in the comments. And remember, never let anyone discount your worth, especially when you own the building.